term workplace is actually read quite widely, the definition of workplace under the POSH Act itself clearly states that it includes any place visited by the employee arising out of or during employment. When interpreting this phrase, courts have also taken the position that it cannot be limited to the official workplace alone, and therefore any act of sexual harassment effected virtually when working from a work from home setting may also be said to be included in the notional definition of a workplace. The Delhi High Court actually explained this quite nicely in the Saurabh Malik case. Yes, this judgment does predate the POSH Act, but it's still quite relevant, because in this case the court explained how CEOs these days often run the office from their residences, and if such persons indulge in acts of sexual harassment with their employees, say with their secretaries for instance, it cannot be open for them to say that they had not committed the act of sexual harassment at the workplace but at their residence and therefore get away with this. It can accordingly be said that the workplace definition is already wide enough to cover incidents of sexual harassment that take place in a work from home setting, but it would certainly be recommended for employers to amend their POSH policies to state specifically that work from home setting sexual harassment incidents are covered within the definition, so that it becomes abundantly clear to employees and also at the same time mitigates against them challenging any actions that are taken by an employer pursuant to any acts of theirs which constitute sexual harassment under the POSH Act. Firstly, employers must start revising their POSH policies to make it abundantly clear that digital platforms such as Skype, Zoom, WebEx, Microsoft Teams, etc. would be covered within the definition of workplace under their POSH policy, and that therefore any acts which would otherwise satisfy the definition of sexual harassment, even if they are now committed from the workplace, would still be sexual harassment and be punishable. Secondly, there may be issues arising from a genuine lack of awareness or sensitization, and employers should therefore ensure that there are mandatory POSH trainings covering issues which are pertinent in today's scenario, such as dressing properly during video calls, insisting on video calls late in the night, insisting on video calls when audio calls would suffice, drawing a clear line between private and personal life in work calls, taking screenshots during video calls, etc. So all of these things are matters which employers should try and cover in mandatory training sessions to sensitize employees. Another thing that organizations must do is have a pulse on the workforce sentiment, possibly by providing employees with regular fora to vent their grievances and raise issues relating to workforce and workplace environment, etc. And we often see employers conducting surveys to have a pulse on the workforce environment, and that's something that employers must do so that they have a clear understanding of what the employees' issues are and fix them before they snowball into something unmanageable. The two key timelines under the POSH Act are with respect to filing of complaints and conduct of the investigation itself. Now, there have been no formal extension with respect to the timelines under the POSH Act, but let's look at the two one by one. In relation to filing of complaints, the timeline currently is 3 months, which may be extended by 3 months by the IC if there are justifiable reasons. So the POSH Act already empowers the IC to extend that timeline, and the current circumstance of the pandemic and the consequent lockdowns would be adequate reasons to condone those delays. The IC may accordingly exercise its discretion in accepting delayed complaints as already empowered by the POSH Act. Secondly, in relation to the timeline, now again there is no clear formal extension and therefore would be recommended to ensure that the IC completes investigations within the 90-day timeline. That said, if there are some delays for genuine reasons, on account of the pandemic and the consequent lockdown for administrative reasons, etc., we don't foresee courts looking into these situations adversely as long as the delays are within the realm of reasonableness and with a basis in good faith. We've also seen that in other matters not specific to POSH, but courts have been relaxing the limitation periods under laws and allowing suits to be filed even if they are delayed. So we don't see courts looking at this adversely, but it would be recommended for ICs to try and complete investigations within the 90-day timeline to the extent possible. There is no bar under the POSH Act on conducting investigations over video, and this is something that we have in fact seen commonly during the last few months in light of the pandemic and lockdowns. That said, taking into consideration privacy and data protection considerations, the audio and video recordings of proceedings should be recorded only with the consent of the parties. In the absence of consent, the IC may record minutes of the meeting and have the parties confirm the same in the way that is usually done during in-person investigations. So, there is no legal risk if consent is obtained prior to taking recordings and if appropriate data protection measures are in place. But there is still the logistical hassle of ensuring that the recordings are secured and stored in a proper manner, and measures are taken to ensure that these recordings are not prone to leaks and hacks. This is especially relevant in light of the strict confidentiality obligations under the POSH Act. The complaint process for women who are subject to cyber harassment remains the same, and every aggrieved woman is required to raise a complaint in writing. However, considering the present circumstances where there is restricted mobility and possibly reduced access to office infrastructure and the like, employees may be allowed to submit complaints through alternate modes such as emails or through the company portal. To avoid any ambiguity, it would always be recommended to clearly set this out in the POSH policy what the accepted alternate modes are, to avoid situations where complaints are raised on social media or informal modes such as WhatsApp, which could create issues of breach of confidentiality and possibly even lead to some unwanted negative publicity.